The barn door rattled in the wind, and Finley Northwood pressed his shoulder against it to keep the storm from tearing it open while the blood trail led straight to his hayloft, and the magistrate's proclamation still echoed in his mind from that morning's town meeting. He had found her collapsed against his fence post 3 hours ago, an orc woman with an arrow through her shoulder and fear in her golden eyes that transformed into defiance the moment she saw him. And now, every rational part of his mind screamed that he should turn her over to the authorities, while his hands worked to bar the door and his boots carried him toward the ladder. The wind howled outside his farmhouse, carrying with it the first cold kiss of an early autumn that promised a harsh winter ahead. Finley had spent 8 years working this land since returning from the border wars. 8 years of solitude broken only by occasional trips to town for supplies, and the distant friendship of neighbors who respected his desire for quiet. He had built something here, something simple and honest that asked nothing of him except hard work, and gave him in return the peace he had been unable to find anywhere else. The magistrate's words from this morning should have been enough to send any reasonable man straight to the authorities with information about a wounded orc on his property. Harboring an orc means hanging, Magistrate Aldrich had announced, his voice carrying across the town square where farmers and tradesmen had gathered for the monthly assembly. The raids on the eastern farms have escalated, 3 families dead in the past fortnight. We will not tolerate orc sympathizers or those who give aid to the enemy. Any person found sheltering, feeding, or providing assistance to an orc will be tried for treason and hanged within 3 days of conviction. Finley had stood in the back of the crowd, his weathered hands tucked into the pockets of his work coat, and said nothing. The eastern farms were 15 miles away, close enough to matter but far enough that he had not personally known any of the dead. The raids were real, that much was certain. Orc war parties had been pushing further into human territory over the past year, driven by something that the authorities claimed was simple savagery, but that Finley suspected was more complicated. He had fought orcs during his time in the military, had killed them and nearly been killed by them in turn, and he knew that they were not mindless monsters no matter what the magistrate wanted people to believe. But he also knew that the law was the law, and that Magistrate Aldrich was the kind of man who would gladly make an example of anyone who defied his proclamations. The magistrate was ambitious, already positioning himself for a run at regional governor, and nothing built a political career quite like being tough on the orc problem. 3 families dead meant fear, and fear meant people would support increasingly harsh measures. Finley had learned long ago not to get involved in politics or causes, to keep his head down and his farm running and let the world spin on without him. Yet here he was, climbing the ladder to his hayloft where a wounded orc woman lay bleeding into his straw, and he could not have explained why even if someone put a knife to his throat. She had pushed herself into the corner farthest from the ladder, her back against the rough wooden wall and her legs drawn up despite the obvious pain it caused her. The arrow had punched through her left shoulder from behind, the iron head protruding from her collarbone and the shaft sticking out of her back. She had broken off most of the shaft behind her, probably to make it easier to move, but the wound was still bleeding steadily, and her green skin had taken on a grayish pallor that Finley recognized from his war days as the beginning of serious blood loss. She was young, probably no more than 20, with the kind of athletic build that spoke of a life lived actively. Her black hair was pulled back in a practical braid that had come partially loose, and her golden eyes tracked his every movement with the wariness of a wild animal, evaluating whether to fight or flee. She wore the leather and fur clothing common to orc hunters, though it was torn and stained with blood and mud, and she had lost one of her boots somewhere along the way. Her tusks were small and delicate, barely protruding past her lower lip, and her pointed ears were pressed flat against her skull in what Finley assumed was fear or aggression. "I am not going to hurt you," Finley said quietly, keeping his hands visible and his movements slow as he approached. He had brought his medicine kit, the same battered leather bag he had carried during the war, and he set it down on the floor of the loft before taking another step forward. "That arrow needs to come out or you are going to die." The orc woman bared her teeth, and her right hand moved to the knife at her belt. She drew it with obvious effort, her injured shoulder making the movement clumsy, but the blade was still sharp, and her grip was still steady enough to be dangerous. "Stay back, human," she growled, her voice rough with pain and her accent thick but understandable. "I will kill you before I let you take me to your authorities." Finley stopped moving and held up his hands. "If I wanted to turn you in, I would have done it already. There were men searching the woods north of here about an hour ago. I sent them toward the river and told them I had not seen anything. So either you trust me enough to let me help you, or you bleed out in my hayloft, and I have to explain to the magistrate why there is a dead orc in my barn." She studied him with those unsettling golden eyes, and Finley found himself wondering what she saw when she looked at him. He was 32 years old, scarred and weathered by work and war, with brown hair starting to show gray at the temples, and the kind of build that came from years of physical labor rather than any particular vanity. He was not a particularly imposing man, not anymore, and he imagined he looked more like a tired farmer than a threat. Whatever she saw, it must have been enough to convince her that he was not an immediate danger, because she lowered the knife slightly though she did not put it away. "Why would you help me?" she asked, suspicion heavy in every word. "Your magistrate said harboring an orc means hanging." "He did say that," Finley agreed. He lowered his hands slowly and picked up his medicine kit. "And I am probably going to regret this when they stretch my neck. But I am not going to let someone die on my property when I have the skills to save them, even if that someone is supposed to be my enemy. Now put the knife down before you pass out and fall on it." She hesitated for another long moment, then slowly lowered the blade and set it on the floor beside her. The movement cost her, and Finley saw her jaw clench against the pain. "My name is Kira," she said, and there was something almost formal about the way she offered the information, as though by giving him her name she was acknowledging a debt. "I am of the Stormcrow clan, though I suspect that means nothing to you." "Finley Northwood," he replied, moving closer now that the immediate threat of being stabbed had passed. "And you are right, I do not know your clan. But I know that arrow is going to kill you if we do not get it out soon so we can handle introductions properly later." He knelt beside her and opened his medicine kit, taking stock of what he had available. Bandages, needle and thread, a bottle of strong whiskey that served as both antiseptic and anesthetic, some dried herbs that helped with pain and infection. It was not much, but it would have to be enough. He had done field surgery during the war with less. "This is going to hurt," Finley warned, pulling the whiskey bottle free and uncorking it. "The arrow went through, so I need to break off the head and pull the shaft out the back. Then I need to clean the wound and stitch both sides. I have whiskey for the pain, but it is not going to be pleasant." Kira's laugh was bitter and pained. "I have been running for 2 days with an arrow in my shoulder and half the human militias in the territory hunting me. I think I can handle a little more pain." She paused, then added with less bravado, "Though I will take the whiskey." Finley handed her the bottle and watched as she took a long pull, her throat working as she swallowed. She coughed slightly and handed it back, and he saw tears gathering in the corners of her eyes, though whether from the whiskey or the pain he could not say. He took a drink himself, feeling the burn all the way down, then set the bottle aside and examined the arrow more closely. The head was a standard iron broadhead, the kind used by militia hunters. It had punched clean through her shoulder, which was actually fortunate since it meant he could remove it without having to push it further through, or try to extract it backwards against the barbs. The shaft had been broken off roughly about 4 inches from her back, leaving enough to grip, but not so much that it would catch on everything when she moved. "I need you to lean forward," Finley instructed, and Kira complied with a grunt of effort, exposing the broken shaft protruding from her back. The flesh around the wound was angry and swollen, and he could see the beginning of infection starting to set in. He would need to work quickly. He gripped the shaft firmly with both hands and met her eyes. "On 3. 1, 2, he pulled hard on 2, using the element of surprise to yank the shaft free before she could tense up. Kira's scream was immediate and instinctive, a sound of pure agony that she cut off almost as quickly as it started by biting down hard on her own forearm. Blood welled from both wounds, front and back, and Finley immediately pressed clean cloth against both holes to stem the bleeding. "You said 3, Kira gasped when she could speak again, her voice shaking and her whole body trembling. "People always tense up waiting for 3, Finley replied, maintaining pressure on the wounds. "Better to get it over with. The worst part is done now." That was a lie, and they both knew it. He still had to clean the wounds and stitch them, and infection was already trying to establish itself. But she had survived the removal, which meant she was strong enough to survive the rest. He worked methodically, the old battlefield training coming back to him as though it had been days rather than years since he last treated a serious wound. He flushed the wounds with whiskey, ignoring Kira's hissed curses in a language he did not understand, then threaded his needle and began the delicate work of stitching her back together. She bore it with remarkable stoicism, her jaw clenched and her breathing controlled, only occasionally letting out a low groan when the needle hit a particularly sensitive spot. Finley found himself impressed despite himself. He had seen grown soldiers cry and beg during field surgery, but this young orc woman held herself together with nothing but will and determination. "Why were they hunting you?" Finley asked as he worked, partly out of curiosity and partly to give her something to focus on besides the pain. "The raids on the eastern farms, was that your clan?" "No," Kira said firmly. "The Stormcrow clan has no part in those raids. We hunt the deep forests and trade with the few humans who are willing to deal fairly with us. But when the raids started, your people did not care about distinguishing between clans. They just wanted orc blood." She paused, her breath catching as Finley tied off another stitch. "I was hunting alone, tracking a deer when a militia patrol found me. I tried to explain that I was not part of the raiding parties, but they shot first and did not bother with questions." Finley moved to the exit wound on her collarbone, cleaning away the blood so he could see what he was working with. "So you have been running for 2 days with an arrow in your shoulder, trying to get away from search parties." "I made it further than I thought I would," Kira admitted. "I was trying to reach the deep wood, where my clan makes their home. If I could cross the river and make it into the old forest, I would be safe. Your people do not venture far into those woods." She looked at him, and there was something vulnerable in her expression despite her obvious attempts to remain stoic. "Why are you doing this, Finley Northwood? You fought orcs in the war. I can see the scars on your hands, the way you move. You know how to kill my kind. Why save me? It was a fair question, and Finley wished he had a better answer for it. He finished the last stitch on her collarbone and tied it off, then sat back and wiped his bloody hands on a rag. "I saw enough killing in the war," he said finally. "Killed enough orcs and watched enough of my friends die to orc blades that I should probably hate your entire race. And maybe part of me does. But I also learned that most of the orcs I killed were just trying to survive, same as we were. They had families and homes and reasons for fighting that made sense to them, even if they did not make sense to me. So when I came back here and started this farm, I promised myself I was done with killing, done with war and causes and choosing sides." He met her eyes. "Finding you bleeding on my property was not exactly what I had in plan for today, but I am not going to break that promise just because the magistrate says I should." Kira was quiet for a long moment, studying him with an intensity that made Finley uncomfortable. Then she said very softly, "You are a strange man, Finley Northwood. Most humans would have killed me or turned me in without a second thought. Your magistrate would probably give you a reward for my capture." "The magistrate can keep his reward," Finley said. He began packing up his medicine kit, satisfied that he had done all he could for now. The wounds were clean and stitched, and he had packed them with herbs that would help fight infection. Whether Kira would survive depended now on her own strength and constitution. "You need rest and food and time to heal. The storm outside should keep any search parties off my land for tonight at least. Tomorrow we will figure out what comes next." He moved toward the ladder, then paused and looked back at her. "There is a blanket in the corner and I will bring you some food and water. Do not try to move around too much or you will tear the stitches. And Kira," he waited until she met his eyes, "I am taking a huge risk helping you. If the magistrate finds out, they will hang me. So I need your word that you are not going to repay my kindness by killing me in my sleep, or stealing from me, or bringing your clan down on this farm." Kira drew herself up as much as her injuries would allow, and there was dignity in her posture that reminded Finley that orcs had their own concepts of honor and obligation. "You have my word, Finley Northwood. I will not harm you or your property, and I will bring no danger to your home. When I am strong enough to travel, I will leave and you will never see me again. But until then, I am in your debt, and the Stormcrow clan honors its debts." Finley nodded, accepting the pledge, then climbed back down the ladder. His hands were shaking slightly as he barred the barn door against the storm, and the full weight of what he had just done was starting to settle over him like a physical burden. He had just committed treason according to Magistrate Aldrich's proclamation. If anyone found out that he was harboring a wounded orc, he would hang. No trial, no mercy, just a rope and a quick drop, and the end of everything he had built here. But as he walked back through the rain to his farmhouse, he found that he could not regret it. Whatever else Kira might be, she was a living being who had been hunted and wounded through no fault of her own, except being born an orc. And Finley had meant what he said about being done with killing. He spent the next hour preparing food and gathering supplies. He made a simple but hearty stew with vegetables from his garden and salt pork from his stores, filled a water skin from his well, and collected extra blankets from his linen chest. When the storm had lessened to a steady rain, he carried everything back to the barn and climbed up to the loft. Kira had managed to wrap herself in the blanket he had mentioned, though the effort had clearly cost her. She was pale and shivering, her body fighting shock and blood loss, but her eyes were alert when he approached. He helped her sit up enough to eat, and she consumed the stew with the desperate hunger of someone who had not eaten properly in days. He made her drink water slowly, remembering how the body could rebel against too much too fast after deprivation, and spread the extra blankets over her to help with the shivering. "Thank you," Kira said when she had finished eating, her voice rough with exhaustion. "For the food and the medicine and the shelter. I know the risk you are taking." "Get some rest," Finley replied, taking the empty bowl. "We can talk more tomorrow when you are stronger. Right now you need to sleep and let your body heal." He left her there in the loft, warm and fed and as safe as he could make her, and returned to his farmhouse. He locked the door, not because he did not trust Kira's word, but because he needed to feel some sense of security, and then he lit the fire in his hearth and sat in his chair watching the flames dance. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing away the blood trail that had led to his barn and buying him at least one night before he had to figure out what to do next. Sleep did not come easily. Every sound made him tense, waiting for the knock on the door that would mean the magistrate's men had found Kira's trail and come to arrest him. But the knock never came, and eventually, exhaustion pulled him under into fitful dreams of war and blood and golden eyes watching him from the shadows. He woke to pale dawn light filtering through his windows and the sound of roosters announcing the morning. For a moment, he lay in his bed wondering if the previous day had been some kind of fever dream. Then his eyes fell on the medicine kit sitting on his table, still spattered with blood, and he knew that it had all been real. There was an orc woman recovering in his barn, and the magistrate's proclamation was still in effect, and Finley was now officially a traitor to his own people. He dressed and went about his morning chores with mechanical efficiency, feeding his chickens and collecting eggs, checking on his 2 cows and making sure they had enough fodder and water. Everything appeared normal, his farm existing in its usual peaceful isolation. But Finley could not shake the feeling that he was standing on the edge of a precipice, waiting for the ground to give way beneath him. When he finally worked up the courage to return to the barn, he found Kira awake and attempting to sit up. She looked better than she had the night before. Some color returned to her green skin and her eyes clearer, but she was still obviously weak and in pain. "How do you feel?" Finley asked, climbing into the loft with fresh bandages and a bowl of porridge he had made for breakfast. "Like I was shot with an arrow and then had it ripped out of me," Kira replied, but there was a hint of dry humor in her voice. "But I am alive, which is more than I expected when I collapsed against your fence yesterday. Your medicine is good, human. The pain is less, and I do not feel the sickness of infection." Finley set down the porridge and examined the wounds, carefully peeling back the bandages to check his work. The stitches were holding and the wounds looked clean, with no signs of the red streaking that would indicate serious infection. He cleaned them again with whiskey and applied fresh bandages, noting the way Kira bore the discomfort without complaint. "You need to eat," he said, handing her the bowl of porridge, "and drink more water. Your body needs fuel to heal." Kira accepted the food and ate slowly, and Finley found himself studying her in the morning light. She was younger than he had initially thought, probably barely past 20, and there was something almost delicate about her features despite her obvious strength. Her tusks caught the light when she tilted her head, and her pointed ears twitched slightly, probably tracking sounds that Finley could not hear. She wore exhaustion and pain like a cloak, but underneath it there was a resilience that impressed him. "I have been thinking about your situation," Finley said carefully. "You said you were trying to reach the Deepwood where your clan lives. How far is that from here?" Kira swallowed a mouthful of porridge and considered the question. 3 days' travel if I was healthy and could move quickly. A week or more with this shoulder, and that is assuming I can avoid the search parties that are still looking for me." She looked at him directly. "You want to know how long you will have to harbor a fugitive before I am gone and you are safe again?" "I want to know what the options are," Finley corrected. You cannot travel in your current condition. Those wounds need at least a week to begin healing properly, maybe 2 before you would be strong enough to make a journey of that length. But the longer you stay here, the greater the risk that someone will discover you. Then perhaps you should turn me in, Kira said, and though her tone was matter-of-fact, Finley could see the tension in her shoulders. Take me to your magistrate and claim the reward. Tell them you found me this morning and captured me. It would be safer for you. If I was going to do that, I would have done it yesterday, Finley said. I told you, I am done with killing and turning someone over to be executed amounts to the same thing. But I am also not stupid enough to think we can keep this hidden indefinitely. This farm is isolated, but I have neighbors and I still need to go to town for supplies. Someone is going to notice something eventually. They sat in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. The morning sounds of the farm filtered up to the loft. Chickens clucking and cows lowing and the wind rustling through the fields. It was peaceful in a way that felt fragile, as though reality was just waiting for the right moment to shatter the illusion of safety. Tell me about your clan, Finley said eventually, breaking the silence. The Stormcrow clan. What are they like? Kira's expression softened slightly, and Finley caught a glimpse of homesickness in her eyes. We are hunters and gatherers, living in the deep forest where the old trees grow thick and tall. We do not raid human settlements or make war unless we are forced to defend ourselves. We trade when we can, furs and herbs and carved goods for metal tools and fabric. My father is the clan leader, and he has always believed that orcs and humans could coexist if both sides would simply leave each other alone. She paused, her jaw tightening. But the raids from the eastern clans have made that dream impossible. Now all orcs are seen as enemies, and there is no room for peace. Is that why you were hunting alone? Finley asked. Most orc hunters I encountered during the war traveled in groups. I prefer solitude, Kira admitted. I am good at tracking and better at moving quietly when I am alone. And I suppose I hoped that a single orc hunter would be seen as less of a threat than a group. I was wrong. She finished the last of her porridge and set the bowl aside. What about you, Finley Northwood? Why does a veteran soldier live alone on a farm in the middle of nowhere? It was Finley's turn to be uncomfortable with personal questions, but he supposed it was only fair given what he had asked her. I needed somewhere quiet after the war. Somewhere I could work with my hands and not have to think about killing or dying or choosing which orders to follow and which to ignore. I saved my military pay and bought this land, built this farm from nothing, and tried to become someone other than the soldier I had been. He met her eyes. It has been a good life, mostly. Lonely sometimes, but good. And now I am risking all of it to help someone I met yesterday. You still have not answered why, Kira pressed. Why risk everything for an enemy? Finley sighed and ran a hand through his hair. There was a battle near the end of the war, a bad one where everything went wrong from the start. We were supposed to be clearing an orc village that intelligence said was a staging ground for raids, but when we got there, it was just families. Old people and children and a handful of warriors trying to protect them. Our commander ordered us to kill them all anyway, said we could not leave enemies at our backs. He closed his eyes, the memory as vivid as though it had happened yesterday. I followed orders. We all did. And when it was over and I was standing in that village surrounded by bodies, I looked at my hands and realized I had become exactly the kind of monster I had signed up to fight against. When he opened his eyes again, Kira was watching him with an expression he could not quite read. So you are trying to atone, she said quietly, saving one orc to make up for killing many. Maybe, Finley admitted, or maybe I am just trying to prove to myself that I can be better than I was. Either way, you are not going to die on my watch if I can prevent it. Kira nodded slowly, accepting his answer, and they fell into another companionable silence. Outside, the world continued on, unaware that in a small barn on an isolated farm, ancient enemies were finding common ground over bowls of porridge and shared honesty. The next few days fell into a careful routine. Finley would wake early and complete his regular farm chores, maintaining the appearance of normalcy in case anyone happened to pass by. Then he would take food and fresh bandages to Kira in the barn, change her dressings and check on her healing progress, and sometimes simply sit with her talking to pass the time. In the evenings, he would bring dinner and they would share the meal while the sun set and the world grew quiet around them. Kira healed slowly but steadily. The wounds were closing cleanly and her strength was gradually returning. She started being able to sit up without assistance, then to stand for brief periods, though Finley made her promise not to try climbing down from the loft until she was stronger. They talked about many things during those days, sharing stories about their lives and slowly building a tentative friendship that felt both natural and dangerous. Finley learned that Kira was skilled not just in hunting but in herbalism, taught by her mother who served as the clan's healer. Kira learned that Finley had grown up on a farm much like this one before joining the military, and that he had chosen soldier's life more to escape an unhappy home than out of any sense of patriotism. They discovered a shared love of early mornings and quiet forests, and they argued good-naturedly about the merits of various hunting techniques, and whether fish or venison made better stew. It was on the fifth day that things shifted between them in a way that Finley had not anticipated. He had brought dinner to the loft as usual, and they were eating while Kira told him a story about a disastrous hunting trip she had taken as a teenager that had resulted in her falling into a frozen creek. She was laughing at the memory, her golden eyes bright with amusement, and Finley found himself struck by how beautiful she was when she smiled. The thought caught him completely off guard. He had not thought of Kira as beautiful before, had been too focused on keeping her alive, and hidden to consider her as anything other than a patient and a responsibility. But now, watching her laugh with genuine joy despite everything she had been through, he found himself noticing the graceful curve of her neck, the way her ears twitched expressively when she was amused, the strength and intelligence in her eyes. She was beautiful in a way that was completely different from human standards, but no less compelling, and the realization made his chest tighten with something that felt dangerously like attraction. He looked away quickly, focusing on his own food and trying to ignore the warmth spreading through him. This was ridiculous. She was an orc, a member of a species he was supposed to consider an enemy. She was also young enough to be his younger sister, wounded and vulnerable and trusting him to keep her safe. Whatever he was feeling, it was inappropriate and needed to be pushed down and ignored. But over the following days, ignoring it became increasingly difficult. He found himself looking forward to the time he spent with Kira more than he should, lingering in the barn longer than was necessary, making excuses to check on her more frequently. He caught himself thinking about her at odd moments while working in his fields, wondering what she was doing, and if she was healing well, and whether she found their conversations as enjoyable as he did. Kira, for her part, seemed unaware of his internal struggle. She was focused on healing and regaining her strength, practicing standing and walking short distances around the loft when she thought her shoulder could handle it. But Finley sometimes caught her watching him with an expression he could not quite interpret, and he wondered if she was feeling the same confusing pull that he was. On the 10th day, everything changed. Finley was in his fields harvesting the last of his late summer vegetables when he saw riders approaching from the direction of town. His heart immediately dropped into his stomach. Visitors were rare out here, and the timing could not be worse. He wiped the dirt from his hands and walked to meet them, trying to project casual unconcern while his mind raced through options and excuses. There were 3 riders, all wearing the insignia of the town militia. Finley recognized the lead rider as Thomas Garrison, a farmer from the Eastern District who had lost a cousin in the orc raids. Thomas had joined the militia immediately after and had developed a reputation for being particularly zealous in hunting orcs. "Finley Northwood," Thomas called as they approached, his tone friendly enough but his eyes sharp and assessing. "Been a while since we have seen you in town. Started to wonder if you were still alive out here." "Just busy with the harvest," Finley replied, keeping his voice level. "What brings the militia all the way out to my property?" Thomas dismounted, and the other 2 riders followed suit. "We are still searching for that orc that escaped from the hunting party 10 days ago. Female, young, black hair, wounded in the shoulder. We tracked her this direction but lost the trail in that storm. You have not seen or heard anything unusual out here, have you?" "No, nothing," Finley lied, and he was grateful for years of military training that allowed him to keep his expression neutral. "But then I do not see much of anything out here. That is why I like it." Thomas nodded slowly, his eyes scanning the farm. "Mind if we take a look around, just being thorough? The magistrate is offering a substantial reward for information leading to the capture of any orc fugitives, and we want to make sure we check every property in the area." Every instinct Finley had screamed at him to refuse, to order them off his land and assert his rights as a property owner. But he knew that would only raise suspicion. "Of course," he said instead. "Though I am not sure what you expect to find, it is just me and my animals out here." The militiamen spread out, checking his barn, his small storage shed, even his house. Finley's heart pounded as Thomas headed straight for the barn, and he fought to keep his breathing steady as he followed. If they found Kira, it was over. They would kill her on sight and probably hang him immediately for harboring her. Thomas climbed into the barn and looked around, his hand resting casually on the sword at his belt. His eyes swept over the ground level, taking in the tools and feed bags, and the 2 cows contentedly chewing their cud in their stall. Then his gaze lifted to the loft, and Finley felt his entire world narrow to a single point of terrible anticipation. "What do you keep up there?" Thomas asked. "Hay and extra feed," Finley replied, praying that his voice sounded normal. "And some old equipment I do not use much anymore." Thomas put his hand on the ladder, and Finley knew he was about to climb up. Time seemed to slow down, and Finley found himself calculating whether he could overpower 3 armed men before they killed him. The answer was almost certainly no, but he was not going to stand by and let them murder Kira without trying to stop them. Then one of the other militiamen called from outside. "Thomas, found something over here." Thomas hesitated, his hand still on the ladder, then turned and headed back out. Finley followed, his legs shaking with relief and residual adrenaline. The other militiaman was standing near the edge of the property, holding up what looked like a piece of torn leather. "Orc clothing," the man said triumphantly. "Fresh, maybe a week old. She came through here." Thomas examined the leather and nodded. "She is heading north toward the deep wood. We need to get search parties on the other side of the river before she crosses." He turned to Finley. "You are lucky you did not run into her. Wounded animals are the most dangerous kind. If you see or hear anything, you come straight to town and report it, understood?" "Understood," Finley agreed, nodding seriously. "I will keep my eyes open." The militiamen mounted up and rode off, heading north at a gallop. Finley waited until they were completely out of sight before allowing himself to lean against the barn wall and take several deep breaths. That had been far too close. If Thomas had climbed that ladder, if Kira had made any sound, if they had searched more thoroughly. He shook his head, pushing away the what-ifs, and climbed back up to the loft. Kira was pressed into her usual corner, her knife drawn and her whole body tense. She must have heard the entire conversation. "They are gone," Finley said quietly. "But they found some of your clothing near the property line. They think you kept heading north toward the deep wood." Kira slowly lowered the knife, but the tension did not leave her shoulders. "That torn piece must have come from when I first stumbled onto your land. I tore my clothing on the fence." She met his eyes, and there was guilt in her expression. "I heard what they said about the reward. You could have turned me in just now. You could have been rich." "I do not want their blood money," Finley said flatly. He sat down across from her, suddenly exhausted. "But Kira, we need to talk about what happens next. They are going to keep searching, and eventually someone is going to think to search more thoroughly. You are healing well, but you are still not strong enough to travel, and I cannot keep you hidden here forever." "I know," Kira said softly. She set the knife aside and pulled her knees up to her chest, wincing slightly at the pull on her shoulder. "I have been thinking about it too. When I am strong enough, I need to try for the deep wood. If I can cross the river and reach the old forest, I can find my way back to my clan. They will protect me." "The river is 10 miles from here and the crossing is guarded," Finley pointed out. "How do you plan to get past the patrols?" "I will figure something out," Kira said, but there was no conviction in her voice. They both knew the odds of her making it were slim at best. Finley was quiet for a long moment, turning over an idea that had been growing in the back of his mind for days now. It was crazy and dangerous and would mean giving up everything he had built here, but the alternative was watching Kira walk to her death or turning her over to people who would kill her. Neither option was acceptable. "What if I went with you?" he said finally. Kira's head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. "What?" "I know the patrol routes and schedules from when I used to serve. I know how to move through hostile territory without being detected. And a human traveling with an orc would be less suspicious than an orc traveling alone, at least until we reach the forest." He met her eyes. "I could help you get to the deepwood safely." "No," Kira said immediately, shaking her head. "No, Finley, this farm is your life. Everything you have built is here. I cannot ask you to give that up for me." "You are not asking. I am offering." Finley leaned forward, his expression serious. "Kira, even if you make it to the deepwood, even if you make it back to your clan, I am already compromised. Thomas and his men know that you came through my property. They are going to keep watching me, keep looking for signs that I helped you. And eventually, someone is going to put together enough evidence to bring me before the magistrate. My life here is already over. The only question is whether I run before they come for me or wait around to hang." Kira stared at him, and he could see her struggling with the implications. "What would you do in the deep wood? You would be alone among orcs, separated from your own people." "I have been alone for 8 years already," Finley replied. "And honestly, my own people have not given me much reason to want to stay with them. I would rather take my chances with orcs who honor their debts than humans who hang anyone who shows mercy to the supposed enemy." "The Stormcrow clan might not accept you," Kira warned. "A human among orcs, it would be unprecedented. They might kill you on sight. Then I will die trying to help you instead of dying from a rope around my neck," Finley said. "Either way, I am not going to abandon you when you still need help. And besides," he added with a slight smile, "you gave me your word that you would repay my kindness. I am calling in that debt. Help me escape this life and start a new one where I do not have to worry about the magistrate and his hangings." Kira looked at him for a long time, her golden eyes searching his face for something. Whatever she found there must have satisfied her, because she finally nodded slowly. "Very well, Finley Northwood. When I am strong enough to travel, we will go to the Deepwood together. And I will speak to my father on your behalf, tell him what you have done for me. I cannot promise he will accept you, but I will do everything in my power to give you a place among the Stormcrow clan." "That is all I can ask for," Finley said. He felt lighter somehow, as though making the decision had lifted a weight he had not realized he was carrying. "We should plan to leave in 3 days. That will give you a bit more time to heal and me time to prepare supplies and figure out our route." They spent the rest of the evening making plans, discussing the best route to the river and how to avoid patrols and what supplies they would need for the journey. It felt surreal, planning to abandon his farm and his life to flee into orc territory with a woman he had known for less than 2 weeks. But it also felt right in a way that Finley could not fully explain. This farm had been a place to hide, a refuge from the world and his past. But Kira had reminded him that hiding was not the same as living, and perhaps it was time to take a risk on something more than just solitary survival. Over the next 3 days, Finley quietly prepared for their departure. He packed food that would keep, filled waterskins, gathered medical supplies and blankets, and anything else he thought they might need. He also packed a few personal items, things that had meaning to him and that he could not bear to leave behind. His father's old hunting knife, a small carved wooden horse that had been his younger brother's before he died of fever, a book of poetry that had been a gift from his mother before everything had fallen apart. He went through his farm one last time, saying goodbye to the place that had been his home for 8 years. He turned his cows loose in the pasture, knowing they would eventually wander to a neighbor's farm and be taken in. He left his chickens with enough food and water to last a week and opened the coop so they could free range. Someone would find them eventually and claim them. The farm itself he simply locked up, leaving everything else in place. Maybe someday, when things changed, he could come back. But he was not counting on it. On the morning of their departure, Finley helped Kira down from the loft for the first time since she had arrived. Her shoulder was still tender and she moved carefully, but she was strong enough to walk and to travel if they took it slow. He had found her some of his old clothing to replace her torn and blood-stained leathers, and though the shirt and pants were too large on her, they were clean and would help her blend in if they encountered anyone from a distance. They set out just before dawn, moving through the fields behind his farm and into the forest beyond. Finley carried their supplies in a large pack, and Kira walked beside him, her hand occasionally going to her shoulder when the movement pulled at her healing wounds. They moved quietly, both of them alert for any signs of patrols or search parties. The first day of travel was slow and careful. Finley guided them along game trails and through thick underbrush, avoiding the main paths where they might encounter other travelers. They rested frequently for Kira's sake, and Finley could see the strain the journey was putting on her even though she tried to hide it. But she never complained, just gritted her teeth and kept walking, and Finley found himself admiring her strength and determination even more. They made camp that night in a small hollow sheltered by fallen trees, and Finley built a tiny fire just large enough to heat some food. They ate in silence, both of them exhausted, and Kira fell asleep almost immediately after finishing her meal. Finley sat watch for a while, listening to the sounds of the forest and thinking about the enormity of what he had done. He had left everything behind, his home and his life, and any chance of going back to the world he had known. But as he looked at Kira sleeping peacefully nearby, her face relaxed in a way he had never seen while she was awake, he found he did not regret it. The second day was harder. Kira woke with her shoulders stiff and painful, and Finley had to help her through some basic stretches before she could move properly. They pressed on, but their pace was slower, and Finley began to worry that they would not reach the river before search parties expanded their net and caught them. His fears proved warranted when, late in the afternoon, they heard voices ahead on the trail. Finley immediately pulled Kira into the underbrush, and they crouched low while a patrol of 6 militia men passed less than 20 feet from their hiding spot. The men were talking about expanding the search grid and checking homesteads more thoroughly, and Finley's blood ran cold when he heard his own name mentioned. "Thomas thinks Northwood might have helped the orc," one of the men was saying. "Wants to bring him in for questioning." "Waste of time," another replied. "Northwood is a veteran. He would not risk hanging for an orc." "Maybe. But Thomas has a gut feeling, and his gut is usually right. We should head to the Northwood farm tomorrow and search it properly." The voices faded as the patrol moved on, and Finley and Kira remained frozen in their hiding spot for several more minutes before daring to move. When they finally continued, Finley noticed that Kira was looking at him with an expression that was part gratitude and part guilt. "You heard what they said," she murmured. "They are going to search your farm. When they do not find you there, they will know you helped me escape. You will be a fugitive, hunted like I am." "I knew that would happen eventually," Finley said, helping her over a fallen log. "That is why I left when I did. No point in waiting around for them to come get me." "But your life, everything you worked for, is already gone," Finley interrupted gently. "Kira, I made this choice with my eyes open. I am not going to spend the rest of our journey having you apologize for something I decided to do. Now come on, we need to put more distance between us and that patrol before we camp for the night." They walked until full dark, when it became too dangerous to continue without light that might give away their position. Finley found another sheltered spot, and they made a cold camp, eating dried meat and bread without the comfort of a fire. The night was cool and Kira shivered despite the blanket Finley wrapped around her shoulders. "Tell me about the deep wood," Finley said quietly, partly to distract her from the cold and partly because he wanted to know what he was walking into. "What is it like?" Kira pulled the blanket tighter and leaned back against a tree. "It is old," she said softly. "The trees there have stood for hundreds of years, so tall and thick that the sun barely reaches the forest floor. There are places where the air itself feels different, charged with something ancient and wild. My people have lived there for generations, building our homes in the branches and clearings, hunting the deep woods and gathering what we need to survive." Her voice grew wistful. "It is beautiful and dangerous and home. Do you think your father will really accept me?" Finley asked. "A human seeking shelter with the Stormcrow clan." "I do not know," Kira admitted. "My father is wise and he values honor, so the fact that you saved my life will carry weight. But there is so much anger toward humans right now, so much fear and pain from the raids and the retaliations. Asking the clan to accept a human, to let one live among us, it is a difficult thing." She looked at him in the darkness. "But I will fight for you, Finley. I will make them understand what you have sacrificed and what kind of man you are. You will not face the clan alone." The quiet conviction in her voice warmed something in Finley's chest. "Thank you," he said. "For what it is worth, I trust you. Whatever happens, I am glad I made this choice." They were quiet for a while, and then Kira said very softly, "Finley, why did you really do this? And do not tell me it is just about atoning for the war. There is more to it than that. I can see it in the way you look at me sometimes." Finley's breath caught, and he was grateful for the darkness that hid his expression. "I do not know what you mean." "Yes, you do. Kira shifted closer, and in the moonlight filtering through the trees, her golden eyes were bright and knowing. Something changed between us over these past days. I felt it too. This is not just about saving a wounded fugitive anymore, is it? Finley wanted to deny it, to deflect and change the subject and pretend that his feelings were purely altruistic. But she deserved honesty, especially now when they were risking everything together. No, he admitted quietly. It is not just about that. I do not know when it happened exactly, but somewhere along the way I stopped seeing you as just someone who needed help and started seeing you as someone I care about. Someone I want to protect not out of obligation, but because the thought of anything happening to you makes my chest hurt. He laughed bitterly. Which is insane, I know. You are an orc and I am a human, and we have known each other for less than 2 weeks. But feelings do not really care about logic or propriety. Kira was silent for a long moment, and Finley braced himself for rejection or mockery. Instead, she reached out and took his hand, her grip warm and strong. It is not insane, she said softly, because I feel it too. When you stayed with me in the loft, when you changed my bandages and brought me food and talked with me like I was a person instead of a monster, I started to see you differently. You made me feel safe for the first time since the hunters shot me, and somewhere in all of that, I started to care about you in a way that has nothing to do with gratitude or debt. Finley squeezed her hand, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. What are we doing, Kira? This is impossible. Even if we make it to the Deepwood, even if your clan accepts me, a relationship between us would be forbidden by both our peoples, Kira finished. Scandalous and dangerous and probably doomed, but Finley, I am already a fugitive and you are already a traitor. We have already chosen the impossible path. What is one more impossibility? Finley looked at her, this fierce and beautiful orc woman who had stumbled into his life and turned everything upside down, and he made another decision that was probably insane but felt absolutely right. He leaned forward slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and when she did not, he kissed her. Her lips were warm and soft despite the tusks, and she kissed him back with a tentative sweetness that made his heart ache. It was brief, just a gentle press of mouths in the darkness, but it felt like a promise and a beginning and 1,000 other things that Finley did not have words for. When they pulled apart, Kira was smiling, and Finley could not remember the last time he had seen something so beautiful. We are both fools, she whispered. Probably, Finley agreed. But I am fine with that if you are. They slept that night with Kira curled against Finley's side, sharing warmth and comfort, and Finley felt more at peace than he had in years despite the danger surrounding them. Whatever tomorrow brought, at least he was not alone anymore. The third day brought them within sight of the river. They could hear it rushing through the valley long before they saw it, and as they crept to the edge of the tree line, Finley assessed their options. The river was wide and fast-moving, swollen with recent rains, and the only crossing point for miles was a wooden bridge that was heavily guarded by militia forces. We cannot cross there, Kira said, stating the obvious. Too many guards. No, but we can cross upstream where the river narrows, Finley replied, pointing to a spot about a mile to the east. The current will be stronger, but the distance is shorter. If we can find something to help us float, we can make it across. They worked their way along the riverbank, staying hidden in the trees, until they found the narrow point Finley had mentioned. It was still a daunting crossing, the water churning white over hidden rocks, but it was their best option. Finley spent an hour gathering dead wood and using rope from his pack to lash together a crude raft, just large enough to support their supplies and give them something to hold onto while swimming. This is going to be dangerous, Finley warned as they prepared to enter the water. The current is strong and the water is cold. Stay close to me and do not let go of the raft no matter what." Kira nodded, her jaw set with determination. They waded into the river together, and the cold was shocking, stealing Finley's breath and making his muscles seize up. He pushed the raft into deeper water and they began to swim, kicking hard against the current that immediately tried to drag them downstream. It was brutal work. The current was stronger than Finley had anticipated, and several times he thought they would be swept away entirely. Kira's injured shoulder made swimming difficult for her, and Finley had to help support her weight while still keeping the raft moving forward. Water rushed over their heads, filling their mouths and noses, and rocks scraped their legs as they fought their way across. They were 50 feet downstream from where they had started by the time they finally dragged themselves onto the far bank, both of them coughing and shivering violently. But they had made it. They were across the river and into orc territory, and the human patrols would not follow them here. Finley pulled their supplies off the raft and helped Kira into dry clothes, checking her shoulder to make sure the stitches had held through the crossing. They had, though the skin around the wound was angry red from the strain. He wrapped her in a dry blanket and built a small fire to warm them, knowing that the risk of being spotted by human forces was now less important than preventing hypothermia. "We made it," Kira said through chattering teeth, huddling close to the fire. "We are in the deep wood." "Not quite yet," Finley corrected, though he smiled at her enthusiasm. "We are on the right side of the river, but we still have several miles of forest to cross before we reach the territory your clan controls. And now, we have to worry about orc patrols instead of human ones." "Orc patrols will be easier to deal with," Kira said confidently. "I can identify myself as Stormcrow clan and ask for safe passage. They might not like you being with me, but they will not attack without provocation." Finley hoped she was right, but he kept his hand close to his knife as they rested. They spent the remainder of the day recovering from the river crossing, and by evening they were ready to move again. Kira led the way now, following paths that only she could see, reading signs in the forest that meant nothing to Finley but clearly spoke volumes to her. They traveled for 2 more days through increasingly dense forest, and Finley began to understand what Kira had meant about the deepwood feeling different. The trees here were massive, their trunks as wide as houses and their canopies so thick that walking beneath them felt like being in a cathedral. The air was rich with the scent of growing things and earth, and there were sounds in the shadows that Finley could not identify. On the afternoon of their 5th day of travel, they encountered the first orc patrol. There were 4 of them, warriors from the look of them, armed with spears and bows. They stepped out of the forest so silently that Finley had no warning until they were surrounded. He reached for his knife instinctively, but Kira put a hand on his arm and stepped forward. "I am Kira of the Stormcrow clan, daughter of Chief Targash," she said in the orcish language, her voice firm and clear. "I was wounded by human hunters and have returned home with a human who saved my life and gave me shelter. I request safe passage to my clan's territory." The lead warrior, a massive orc male with graying hair and scars that spoke of many battles, studied them both with shrewd eyes. His gaze lingered on Finley with obvious suspicion, but when he spoke, his tone was respectful. "Kira Stormcrow, we received word that you were missing. Your father has been searching for you, but why do you bring a human into the Deepwood? You know that humans are not welcome here." "This human saved my life when he could have turned me over to his authorities for execution," Kira replied, switching to the common tongue so Finley could understand. "His name is Finley Northwood, and he is under my protection. I am bringing him before my father to request that he be granted sanctuary with our clan." The warriors exchanged glances, clearly uncertain about this unprecedented situation. Finally, the leader nodded slowly. "We will escort you to your father and let him decide what to do with this human. But know that we will be watching him closely, Kira. If he makes any threatening moves, we will kill him immediately." "Understood," Kira said. She looked back at Finley and gave him a reassuring nod. "It will be all right. Just stay close to me and do not do anything that could be seen as aggressive." The patrol surrounded them, and they continued deeper into the forest, and Finley tried to ignore the feeling of spear points at his back. They walked for hours, and gradually Finley began to notice signs of habitation. Rope bridges between trees, platforms built high in the branches, carefully tended clearings where gardens grew. And then, finally, they emerged into a large clearing where dozens of orc dwellings were built both on the ground and in the trees above. The Stormcrow clan village. Orcs stopped what they were doing to stare as the patrol led them through the village, and Finley could feel the weight of their hostile gazes. He heard whispers in the orcish tongue, angry and suspicious, and he knew that his presence here was causing exactly the kind of uproar Kira had warned him about. But Kira walked beside him with her head high, and her confidence gave him courage. They were brought to a large dwelling in the center of the village, and the lead warrior called out something in Orcish. A moment later, a massive orc male emerged from the dwelling. He was older than the warriors, his black hair streaked liberally with gray, but his build was still powerful and his golden eyes were sharp and intelligent. He saw Kira, and his entire expression transformed from stern authority to overwhelming relief. "Kira!" he exclaimed, rushing forward and pulling her into a careful embrace that minded her injured shoulder. "We thought you were dead. The hunting parties that went searching found your trail, but it disappeared near the river. What happened to you?" "It is a long story, Father," Kira said, and there were tears in her eyes as she hugged him back. "But I am home now, and I am safe." Chief Targosh pulled back and his eyes fell on Finley, and immediately his expression hardened again. "Why is there a human in my village?" he demanded. Kira took a deep breath and stepped back to stand beside Finley, and he could feel her gathering her courage. "Father, this is Finley Northwood. He is the reason I am still alive. When I was shot by human hunters and fleeing for my life, I collapsed on his property. He could have turned me in for a reward, could have killed me himself, but instead he treated my wounds and hid me from the search parties. When it became too dangerous for me to stay, he gave up everything he had to help me reach the Deepwood. His own people now consider him a traitor and will execute him if he returns." She met her father's eyes steadily. "I have brought him here to request that you grant him sanctuary with the Stormcrow clan." The silence that followed was thick with tension. Chief Targosh stared at Finley with an expression that was impossible to read, and Finley forced himself to meet that gaze without flinching. Finally, the chief spoke. "You saved my daughter's life, human. For that, you have my gratitude, but what you ask is nearly impossible. A human living among the Stormcrow clan. My people would never accept it, especially not now when we have lost so many to human violence." "I understand your hesitation," Finley said, finding his voice. "And I know I have no right to ask for sanctuary among your people. But I have nowhere else to go. I am hunted by my own kind for showing mercy to an orc, and I do not regret that choice. If you cannot grant me a place here, then I will leave and take my chances in the wilderness. But I am asking you to at least consider it, because your daughter is one of the bravest and most honorable people I have ever met. And if the Stormcrow clan raised her, then I believe they are people who value honor and justice over blind hatred." Chief Targosh's eyes narrowed slightly, but Finley thought he saw a glimmer of respect there. "You speak well for a human, But words are easy. How do I know you are not a spy sent to infiltrate our clan? How do I know you will not betray us at the first opportunity? You do not, Finley admitted. You have only my word and the testimony of your daughter, but I swear to you on everything I hold sacred that I mean your clan no harm. I only want a place to live in peace, to work and contribute and maybe find a new purpose now that my old life is gone. Kira stepped forward again. Father, I know this is difficult, but Finley has proven himself trustworthy in every way that matters. He risked his life for mine, gave up his home and his safety to help me. That should count for something. Chief Targosh was quiet for a long time, his gaze moving between Kira and Finley. Finally, he sighed heavily. I will not make this decision alone. The clan council will meet tonight to discuss this matter. Until then, the human will be confined to the guest dwelling under guard. Kira, you will come with me. We have much to discuss. Kira looked like she wanted to argue, but she nodded and squeezed Finley's hand briefly before following her father. The warriors escorted Finley to a small dwelling on the edge of the village, and he was left there with 2 guards posted outside. It was not exactly a prison, but it was clear he was not free to move around either. Finley sat in the dwelling and tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. The council might decide he was too dangerous to keep alive. They might expel him from the deep wood and force him to take his chances in the wilderness. Or they might accept him but make his life here so miserable that he wished they had killed him outright. He had gambled everything on Kira's belief that her father was a just and honorable leader, and now all he could do was wait to see if that gamble would pay off. Night fell, and Finley could hear the sounds of the village settling down for the evening. Somewhere in the distance, drums were beating and voices were raised in what might have been song or argument. He could not tell which. He thought about Kira, wondered what she was saying to her father and the council, hoped that she was safe and not facing too much backlash for bringing him here. It was well past midnight when the door to the dwelling opened and Kira slipped inside. The guards did not stop her, which Finley took as a good sign. She looked exhausted, her face drawn with stress, but there was a small smile on her lips. The council has made their decision, she said, sitting down beside him. It was not unanimous, and there were some very heated arguments, but my father ultimately supported me. You are being granted provisional sanctuary with the Stormcrow clan. Finley felt relief wash over him so strongly that he had to close his eyes for a moment. Thank you, he breathed. Kira, I do not know how to thank you enough. Do not celebrate yet, Kira warned. The sanctuary comes with conditions. You will be watched closely for the first year. You will not be allowed to leave the Deepwood without permission. You must learn our ways and our language and prove that you can contribute to the clan. And most importantly, if you ever betray our trust or cause harm to any member of the clan, the sanctuary will be revoked and you will be executed immediately. I can accept those terms, Finley said without hesitation. I will do whatever is necessary to prove myself worthy of this chance. Kira's smile widened and she reached out to take his hand. There is one more thing. My father knows about us, about how we feel about each other. I had to tell him because he would have figured it out anyway, and I did not want there to be secrets between us. She took a deep breath. He is not happy about it. A relationship between a human and an orc is something that has never happened in the Stormcrow clan, and many of the council members think it is wrong. But my father said that if we are determined to pursue this connection, we must do it properly and openly, following the traditions of our people. Finley's heart was beating faster. What does that mean? It means that if we want to be together, we must formally court according to Stormcrow customs. There will be trials and challenges to prove that we are suited for each other. And at the end of a year, If we still wish to join our lives, we can request the clan's blessing for a bonding ceremony. Kira's golden eyes searched his face. It will not be easy, Finley. There will be people who oppose us every step of the way, but if you are willing to try, if you truly want this, then I am willing to fight for it. Finley cupped her face in his hands, minding the tusks, and kissed her gently. I have already given up everything else in my life for you. A year of proving myself seems like a small price to pay for the chance to build something real with you. Yes, Kira, I want to try. They held each other in the darkness of the dwelling, and Finley felt something settle in his chest that he had not felt in years. Hope, purpose, the sense that he was finally where he was supposed to be. The next morning, Finley's provisional acceptance into the clan was announced formally. The reaction was mixed, with some orcs openly hostile and others cautiously willing to give him a chance. Chief Targash assigned him to work under one of the clan's master craftsmen, a gruff older orc named Rothak who made tools and weapons. Finley threw himself into the work, determined to prove his worth. The days turned into weeks, and slowly Finley began to find his place in the Stormcrow clan. He learned the orcish language, stumbling over the guttural sounds at first but gradually becoming more fluent. He learned the customs and traditions, the ways of showing respect and the importance of honor and community. He worked alongside Rothak in the forge, and though the old orc rarely praised him, Finley noticed that he gradually began to trust him with more complex tasks. Kira was his constant support through it all. She taught him the things he needed to know, defended him when others spoke against him, and reminded him on the hard days why all of this was worth it. Their courtship followed the traditional Stormcrow customs, which meant they spent time together under supervision, worked on projects that would benefit the clan, and participated in various challenges designed to test their compatibility and commitment. One of the challenges involved a hunt where they had to work together to track and bring down a large stag. Finley's military training and Kira's natural hunting skills complemented each other perfectly, and they succeeded in a way that impressed even the skeptics. Another challenge required them to build a dwelling together from scratch, demonstrating that they could cooperate on practical matters. They spent 3 weeks working on the project, and the small house they built in the trees became a symbol of what they were trying to create together. As the months passed, Finley noticed the hostility toward him beginning to soften. The orcs who had been most opposed to his presence started to nod to him in passing, or occasionally ask his opinion on matters related to his expertise. Children who had initially been frightened of him began to approach cautiously, their curiosity eventually overcoming their fear. He was still an outsider, still different, but he was becoming a part of the community in ways he had not thought possible. Chief Targash remained distant but fair, watching Finley's progress with shrewd eyes. On the 6-month mark of Finley's sanctuary, the chief called him to his dwelling for a private conversation. "You have done well, Finley Northwood," Targash said, gesturing for him to sit. "Better than I expected, if I am being honest. You work hard, you respect our customs, and you have made genuine efforts to integrate into our clan. Many who were opposed to your presence have changed their opinions." "I am grateful for the opportunity, Chief Targash," Finley replied. "This clan has given me more than I could have hoped for." Targash nodded slowly. "And what of my daughter? Do you truly love her, or is she simply a means to securing your place here?" The directness of the question caught Finley off guard, but he met the chief's gaze steadily. "I love Kira more than I can properly express. She is brave and kind and strong, and she challenges me to be better than I was. If the clan had refused to accept me, I would have left and found another way to survive rather than put her in a position where she had to choose between her home and me." My place here is important, but it is not why I want to be with her." Targash studied him for a long moment, then finally nodded. "Good. Because if I thought you were using my daughter, I would kill you myself regardless of what you have done for this clan. But I can see the way you look at her, and I can see the way she looks at you. You have something real, however impossible it seemed at first." He paused. "There are still 6 months left in your trial period, and there will be more challenges ahead, but I want you to know that you have my support. When the year is complete, if you and Kira still wish to bond, you will have my blessing." Finley felt emotion tighten his throat. "Thank you, Chief Targash. That means more to me than you know." The remaining 6 months passed both quickly and slowly. There were moments of joy, like the festival where Kira taught Finley the traditional Stormcrow dances, and they laughed together under the stars. There were moments of challenge, like when a group of young warriors challenged Finley to prove his combat skills, and he had to demonstrate that he could defend himself without relying on his weapons. And there were quiet moments where he and Kira would sit together in the dwelling they had built, talking about their hopes and dreams for the future. As the 1-year mark approached, the clan began preparing for the bonding ceremony. It would be the first time in Stormcrow history that a human and an orc would be formally joined, and Chief Targash insisted that it be done with all the proper traditions and honors. Kira worked with the clan's craftswomen to create her ceremonial clothing, and Finley was taught the vows he would need to make and the responsibilities he would be taking on. The ceremony took place on the first anniversary of Finley's arrival in the Deepwood, held in the great clearing at the center of the village. The entire clan gathered to witness, and Finley felt the weight of their attention as he and Kira stood before Chief Targash under the ancient trees. "We gather today to witness something unprecedented," Chief Targash announced, his voice carrying across the clearing. "The bonding of Kira Stormcrow, daughter of this clan, and Finley Northwood, human who has earned his place among us. This joining represents not just the love between two individuals, but the possibility of understanding and peace between our peoples. It is a symbol of hope in dark times, and a testament to the power of compassion and honor." Kira and Finley exchanged vows in both the Orcish and common tongues, promising to support and cherish each other, to face the challenges of their unusual union with courage and honesty, and to honor both the Stormcrow clan and the bond they were creating. When it came time to exchange tokens, Finley presented Kira with a beautifully crafted knife he had made himself in Rothak's forge, the handle carved with symbols representing both their peoples. Kira gave him a woven bracelet made from her own hair and blessed by the clan's elders, a symbol of protection and belonging. Chief Targash bound their hands together with a ceremonial cord and spoke the final blessing. "You are now joined in the eyes of the Stormcrow clan and the spirits of the Deepwood. May your bond be strong and your love endure all trials. May you build a life together that honors both your origins and creates something new and beautiful." The clan erupted in cheers and celebration, and Finley pulled Kira close, kissing her deeply while the Deepwood witnessed their impossible love made real and official. There was still work to be done, bridges to build between their peoples, and the challenges of being the first of their kind would never fully disappear. But in that moment, surrounded by a community that had chosen to accept them despite all the reasons they should not, Finley knew that he had found something more valuable than the peaceful solitude he had sought on his farm. He had found home. Not in a place, but in a person and the family they had chosen to build together. The celebration lasted long into the night, with music and dancing and feasting that brought the clan together in joy. Finley danced with Kira under the stars, their hands still bound by the ceremonial cord, and he thought about the chain of impossible choices that had led him to this moment. A wounded orc collapsing against his fence, a magistrate's proclamation, a locked door and a lit fire. Each decision made in the moment, each risk taken without knowing if it would lead to salvation or destruction. But here he was, bonded to the most remarkable woman he had ever known, accepted by a clan that had every reason to reject him, and finally at peace with the man he had become. The magistrate had said that harboring an orc meant hanging, but Finley had locked the door and lit the fire anyway, and in doing so had found a life richer and more meaningful than any he could have imagined. As the celebration continued around them, Finley and Kira slipped away to the dwelling they had built together, the one that would now be their home. They stood on the platform high in the trees, looking out over the deep wood that stretched endlessly in all directions, and Kira leaned against him with a contented sigh. "No regrets?" she asked softly. Finley wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. "Not a single one. Everything I gave up was worth it to have this, to have you. And everything I risked was worth it to have you here with me," Kira replied. She turned in his arms and looked up at him, her golden eyes bright with love and happiness. "We are going to have a good life, Finley Northwood. A strange one and sometimes a difficult one, but a good one." "The best one," Finley agreed, and he kissed her again, sealing the promise they had made to each other and to the future they would build together. In the months and years that followed, Finley and Kira became a symbol within the Stormcrow clan of what was possible when prejudice was set aside, and individuals were judged by their actions rather than their origins. Their dwelling in the trees became a gathering place for those who sought to bridge the divide between orcs and humans. And slowly, cautiously, relationships began to form between the Stormcrow clan and the few human settlements willing to trade fairly and coexist peacefully. Finley taught the clan new techniques for metalworking and farming that he had learned in his human life, and in return he learned the orcish ways of hunting and herbalism, and living in harmony with the forest. He and Kira worked together on projects that benefited the entire clan, from improving the water systems to organizing better defenses against the raiding clans that sometimes threatened their territory. 2 years after their bonding ceremony, Kira gave birth to their first child, a daughter who had her mother's golden eyes and pointed ears but her father's brown hair and smaller stature. They named her Alara, and she became the first child of mixed heritage in the Stormcrow clan, a living symbol of the bridge between two worlds. The clan welcomed her with love and celebration, and Finley felt his heart overflow with gratitude and joy as he held his daughter for the first time. Life was not always easy. There were still those who harbored resentment about a human living among them, and there were complications that came from raising a child who would never quite fit into either the human or orc worlds completely. But Finley and Kira faced each challenge together, their bond growing stronger with each passing year. Chief Targosh lived to see the birth of 3 grandchildren through Kira and Finley, and before he died peacefully in his sleep at a great age, he told Finley that accepting him into the clan had been one of the best decisions he had ever made. Kira eventually became chief of the Stormcrow clan after her father's passing, and Finley stood beside her as her counsel and partner, helping to guide the clan through times of both peace and conflict. The magistrate who had proclaimed that harboring an orc meant hanging eventually lost his position when his corruption and cruelty became too egregious to ignore, and a new, more moderate government took power in the human territories. Tentative peace talks began between the human settlements and the orc clans, and Finley and Kira were often called upon to serve as mediators and examples of what cooperation could achieve. But through all the years and changes and challenges, what Finley treasured most were the quiet moments. The evenings spent with Kira and their children in the dwelling they had built together, sharing stories and laughter as the deep wood whispered around them. The mornings waking up next to the woman he loved, sunlight filtering through the trees and birdsong filling the air. The sense of belonging and purpose that came from being part of a community that valued him not despite his differences, but because of what those differences brought to the whole. Finley had left his farm behind seeking only to save a life and perhaps atone for past sins. What he had found instead was love, family, and a home that transcended the boundaries of race and species. He had discovered that the things worth having were often the things that required the greatest risks, and that sometimes the most impossible choices led to the most beautiful outcomes. The magistrate had said harboring an orc meant hanging, and technically, he had been right. Finley had died that day when he locked the door and lit the fire with Kira bleeding in his barn. The man he had been, the isolated veteran hiding from his past, had ceased to exist. But what had been born in his place was something better, something richer, something infinitely more alive. And as Finley sat on the platform of his tree dwelling decades later, his hair gray and his body marked by the passage of time but his heart still full, surrounded by children and grandchildren who carried both human and orc blood in their veins, he knew with absolute certainty that he would make the same choice again in a heartbeat. The impossible had become possible. The forbidden had become family, and the door he had locked against the world had opened into a life beyond anything he could have dreamed.